Hello and welcome back to Bruised and Battered A Discussion. My name is Stacy and I am the author of a series called Bruised and Battered Stories of Triumph, Volume 1, Beauty and the Beatings. So in this series, I'm going through my book and reading aloud excerpts from the book, which are various pieces of a journal, several journals actually, that I kept over the past 20, 30 years. I kind of pieced them all together. And if you watched episode 1, you know how that came to be. I told you about my friend Debbie and how she encouraged me to write a book. And I was very hesitant at first to do that. And then it just kind of caught on. She planted a seed and here I am today. So if you know me, you know that I share my story just about everywhere. I share it with people that I meet randomly. I share it professionally across my website, through my social media pages. I have a podcast called Talk to Me that is an Anchor sponsored podcast. It airs predominantly on Spotify, but it is available wherever you get your podcast. And now this YouTube series. So, like I said, I just want to go through the book and read a few excerpts and just have a discussion and just kind of share with you from a victim's perspective, rather a survivor's perspective, what was happening in my head during this period of time. So without any further ado, I kind of just want to jump right into it. Oh, but one thing. I owe you guys an apology. So in the trailer to this series, I told you how excited I was that all of my equipment was in and I had a tripod, right? And I was like, oh, this is going to take my production to the next level. Well, so last week I hooked the camera, which is my phone, up to the tripod, and I was like, ooh, I don't like that angle. And so I was feeling really self-conscious, and I'm like, you know what? Forget this tripod. I'm just going to hold the phone, right? Because I know about angles. And I can totally shave off this, extra fluff right here and this right here and all of this. So I was feeling very self-conscious, and I, in the name of vanity, opted to hold my phone as I recorded. And I got some feedback from the premiere from episode 1, and everyone really enjoyed the content. But resoundingly, it was like, you have a great nose, but we'd like to see all of your face. So I am so sorry, you guys. I promise I will try to stop being so vain. Because really, at the end of the day, this isn't about what I look like. It's about getting the message to you. So, and for you to share it with people that you may come into contact with that you think it would benefit them. So now I'm going to hop into episode 2. I am so far ahead of myself. If you keep coming back week after week, you'll see that this is just like a constant thing with me. So hang on for the ride. Okay, so the year is 1992. And as you already know, we met during the first quarter of my freshman year. Early on, I discovered he had a wandering eye. He was by all accounts a ladies' man, and this became a point of contention in our new relationship. My unconventional housing made it possible for him to stay with me frequently. While I had housemates, I had my own bedroom. It was nothing for him to leave clothes, music, and other personal items in my room while he was at work. In all reality, we were living together. By February, I had become pregnant. I was petrified to tell him. Although we had never discussed starting a family, I was pretty sure my news of impending fatherhood wasn't news he would receive happily. His reaction to my news was no reaction. He acted as though if he ignored it, it would just go away. One March afternoon, while he was at work, I was straightening up my room. One of the items he had left behind on this particular day was his passport. He used his passport as an ID and had left it lying on my desk. When I moved it to dust, a slip of paper fell out, and naturally I bent over to pick it up and saw a handwritten phone number with the name Dana written under it. I was pregnant and more emotional than usual, so the tears fell like a waterfall. Looking back, I really believe that this is the particular moment that the tough girl that I struggle with so vehemently was born. I decided revenge would be mine. So I was going to teach him a very, very valuable lesson. I created a fake number and name and wrote it on a similar piece of paper and slid it under his passport. When he came back over later that evening, as I had hoped, he found the paper with the fictitious number. His reaction was not anything I could have predicted. He was drinking beer from a 40-ounce glass bottle and asked me, "What the fuck is this?" I began giggling. I was certain he knew it was fake and was acting mad to play along with my dramatic moment. But I was wrong, very wrong. My frivolity only further aggravated him. He threw his nearly full glass bottle of beer in my direction. I was lying on the bed, on my back, and the beer bottle hit the wall behind me, and it shattered. Shards of glass and beer exploded over my pregnant body. I was going to read a little bit further into this, but I think this is where I want to stop reading and just kind of discuss with you my frame of mind during this period of time. So I had shared with you in chapter 1 or in session episode. Why do I keep struggling with that? I had shared with you in episode 1 that I hadn't really had a lot of relationships leading up until this point. I had had a few boyfriends here and there in high school, but mostly they were, dances and dates to dances and proms and homecomings and things like that, but never anything serious. And I did not lose my virginity until I went to college. I was very much a wholesome Midwest girl. So when I met him, again, I shared this with you in episode 1 that I didn't like him. I was annoyed by him. He was cocky. He was rude. He had this crass personality. Like, he was just a jerk. But he kept coming around, and I didn't read that from the book, but he kept coming around. One of my friends was dating, I guess, one of his friends, the guy in the band. And so whenever he would come over, he would come with him. The two of them would come together. And so I guess just over time, I got to know him a little bit better and ended up falling in love with him. And he was honestly my first true love. So when you love somebody and they hurt you, it's really hard to process that. So, I am not alone in saying this. Every woman or man, every person who has been in an abusive relationship has heard at least 100 times, "Why didn't you just leave?" Well, Karen, I don't know. I don't know why I didn't just leave. I mean, obviously that would have made my life a lot easier, right? But it wasn't that simple. I loved him. And a lot of times people will say, "Oh, well, you probably stayed for the kids or you stayed for the money." It was neither of those things for me. He was a horrible father. He was not involved with the boys at all. When it was time to discipline, he was there. But as far as like teaching them to throw a football or teaching them to ride their bikes or teaching them to drive or, the birds and the bees, like none of that stuff. He wasn't there for that. But if they misbehaved and they needed disciplined, he was absolutely there for that. So it wasn't that he was some outstanding father. And as far as the money goes, I almost always made more money than him because I worked more consistently than he did. So the reason that I stayed with him 110% was nothing more than I loved him. And I realize now that I'm out of those chains of that abusive and toxic relationship, that wasn't love. But in the moment, you couldn't convince me that it wasn't love. It was all I knew of love. I shared this in the book, and I shared it a little bit later in the book, but it was something that upset my mother. And so I want to clarify this today. I said that I grew up with abuse. I did not mean that my parents abused me. That is not what I meant. What I meant was I grew up in a home that had domestic violence. My father had a very explosive temper. And while I never saw him hit my mother, I did see him shove my mother once. I have heard my father yell at my mother. I heard the language that my father used. And if I'm completely honest, he used that language with us kids as well. So this was the template that I had for what a relationship was supposed to be. So it goes without saying that as I moved into my own relationship, I didn't necessarily see this as being anything alarming because it was what I knew. And and obviously, don't take me literally here. I mean, I know right from wrong, and I know that every relationship isn't like that. But when that's the template that you have put before you, you just kind of follow in that line. So that's what happened. I followed in that line, and not for nothing, you guys, he did the same thing. He grew up in a home that was riddled with domestic violence. I mean, not necessarily as much physical, although that was present. There was a lot of mental abuse that he dealt with and saw as a child coming up. So the two of us just came from a place of unhealthy relationship patterns, and we fell into that cycle ourselves. So when it came time for me to leave, to this day, it's one of the hardest things I ever had to do. It was really very difficult for me to walk away from him. And if I'm completely honest with you, I never really did fully walk away from him. Even after he and I were no longer together, I was still caring for him. He had a medical condition, and because I do try to protect his privacy in the book, without getting too much into that, it required a lot of trips back and forth to specialty doctors. And in the beginning, I was the one that sat in the hospital with him when he was admitted and, was taking him back and forth to these appointments. And I don't tell you that because I want you to applaud me or think that I'm some sort of heroine or saint. That's not the case. Because if you read my book, and as we get further into this, you'll find that I did some pretty not so nice things. I definitely had some stuff with me. So, but in the beginning, that wasn't the case. And I stayed with him, and I continued to deal with him even after I was no longer with him, because that kind of love changes, but it doesn't ever completely go away. It's the father of my children. And I met him when I was 19 years old. So we grew up together. I was 19, he was 21. We grew up together, you guys. And so why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because I want you to have that understanding, to be armed with that knowledge if you come across somebody in a situation like the one I was in, or even similar to the one I was in. It's not easy to just walk away. We can't just, it's just not that simple, because if it were, women wouldn't be dying at the hands of their abusers. If it was as simple as just packing up and walking away, women would do it. But when matters of the heart are involved, it gets a little bit more complicated. So that's what I wanted to cover in the segment of the book that I read aloud today. I wanted you to understand that this relationship, albeit toxic, albeit unhealthy, it was rooted in love. I truly believe that he loved me. I know that he loved me, and I loved him. Unfortunately, we were not good together. And so that took us down the path that it took us down. But I wanted to share that with you because I wanted you to, like I said, be armed with that knowledge that leaving a relationship, leaving a situation isn't as easy as just leaving. And I feel like you needed to hear that. And when I say you, obviously I'm saying you globally, because I don't know exactly who's watching this. But if you are, I love you, and I think you're amazing for tuning into my series. That's all I've got for today. This series is something that I'm really excited to bring to you. I think I talked about it in episode 1 that I just kind of, it's been shared with me by a mentor of mine that there's a way to deliver information and to get from point A to point B. And the analogy is that of spokes in a wheel. And I feel like I am just adding spokes to my wheel. It's so important to me. These books that I'm writing, it's not just something that I'm doing to pass my time. It's something that I'm doing because each and every book is subject matter content that is near and dear to my heart. The first book obviously was the easiest and the hardest to write because it is something that has absolutely molded me into the woman that I am today. Had I not gone through these various situations in this story of mine, I wouldn't be the woman that I am right now. I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today. It wouldn't have happened. So it's important to me. So the spokes in the wheel, this is another spoke. I want to get this information out in every way possible. So whether it is in a written book, whether it is on a podcast, whether it's through Facebook interaction, Instagram interaction, or now YouTube interaction. If you're following me, please share my story, share these links if it's something that you feel like is valuable information. And I hope that everything I share you feel is valuable information. Please share this information so we can help remove the stigma, first and foremost, of being in a situation that is abusive, that is toxic, that is dangerous, that is unhealthy, and empower women to stand strong on their own 2 feet and to break those cycles of abuse. If we work together, if we stay connected, we can absolutely do that. So you being here today and just watching is the beginning of that process. So thank you again. I love you so very much. And I'll be back next Saturday with another excerpt from Beauty and the Beatings. Until then, take care and be good to one another. Bye-bye now.